Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to session 8. I think that everyone has joined us now who's going to be joining us today. Can you please just type a quick hello into the box if you can hear me and you can see the screen. Again, just type hello into the box if you can hear me and see the screen. Thank you, Wendy. Thanks, Sue. Thanks, Helen. Thanks, Mary. Thank you, Carmen. Great. So it looks like we have technology working for us again for the second week in a row, although I probably shouldn't have said that because I probably have just made a big mistake. I just do want to let you know today that Dale is not here at the start of our session. She may join us as the session goes along. They have parent-teacher conferences in the high school today in Doha, and Dale had some last-minute changes to her schedule, and she is meeting with some parents, but if she finishes before the session finishes, she will be joining us, and we'll let you know if we see her log on. So again, thank you everybody for joining today. Same housekeeping as always. We're going to turn your webcams and microphones off for most of the time. We'll turn them on during the discussion parts. If you need to contact us at any time, just type an asterisk into the box, and we will open your microphone. And the recording from session 8 will be available to view beginning tomorrow morning. So if you want to go back and look at something that we've done or talked about today, you'll be able to do that first thing in the morning tomorrow. I'm going to ask in a moment, I'm going to ask a question in a moment, but right now we're planning to use GoToMeeting for our main online piece, and then to have you use some offline technology for your parent discussions. But I'll tell you more about that in just a moment. Our pairings today are a little bit different than what you see here. We'll have Wendy and Helen and Sue, and then Carmen and Mary, I think. And I say I think because I'm just curious to know how far you got with Learning Log 8.1. And I want to begin by apologizing because I realized last night when I received an email from Wendy that I had not attached the course guide for session 8 to the email. And of course, the course guide has a lot of the background information as well as directions for where to go to get other information, background information, in order to do the task. So could you please, in the chat box, could you just write a short description of how far you got with Learning Log 8.1? And you can use simple words like not started, started but not far, started mostly complete, or complete. So again, in the chat box, could you just let me know how far you got with Learning Log 9.1? I'm sorry, 8.1. So Helen is completed, Carmen not started, Wendy is completed, Mary not started, and what about Sue? In progress. Okay. So what I am going to suggest, because some people have completed and some people haven't, that similar to what we did last week, we're going to turn over the big screen to all of you and have you do your group discussion online. And that way, again, because some people have completed and some haven't, you'll be able to hear at least 2 explanations of the approaches that people took, or 3, because Sue is also in progress. And I think that'll just be a more productive discussion rather than dividing you up into small groups. So don't worry about the second devices today. When we come to that part of the session, we will turn over the screen to you and we'll mute ourselves and allow you to have your group discussion online through GoToMeeting. All right, guys, thank you very much for that. Before we get started, does anyone have any questions about anything from session 8 or anything from any of the previous sessions that you'd like to ask? And again, if you just type an asterisk into the box and we'll know to open your microphone. All right, and again, at any time during the session today, please feel free to do that if you need to contact us or ask a question at any time. Our question today for session 8 is, how will I analyze qualitative data? And of course, one of the things that I want to point out is that in an action research project, you're likely to collect both quantitative data and qualitative data. And we chose to focus on qualitative data in this session because we've made an assumption that if you have not done action research before, or maybe even if you have, that you will be either less familiar or less comfortable with looking at qualitative data. And in today's exercise, in the Learning Log 8.1, we presented you with one of the most common forms of qualitative data that you may be faced with trying to make sense of, and that is a set of responses to an open-ended question. You may get those responses through a student survey, through a question at the end of an assessment, or you just ask an open-ended question. You might get them through interviews or through focus groups. And so we just wanted to show you how one approach to analyzing that type of qualitative data. As in past weeks, I am going to show you a quick video that summarizes the content for this week.
Hello, and welcome to Session 8 of Getting Started with Action Research. In previous sessions, we discussed data collection methods. You drafted a data collection plan for your action research question, and we considered ways to enhance the validity of your action research plan. In this session, we will introduce a method for analyzing qualitative data. In most action research projects, you will collect both quantitative data and qualitative data. Teachers and education professionals engaged in action research will be well practiced when it comes to analyzing quantitative data arising from scaled survey responses, standardized assessments, teacher assessments, school entry data, prior attainment data, and other sources of numeric data. Depending on whether this quantitative data is discrete or continuous, it can be presented using a range of familiar charts, graphs, and other data visualization methods. But when it comes to qualitative data, teachers and education professionals typically rely on framework analysis. One familiar example of framework analysis is the use of a rubric to provide feedback on a piece of student writing. The writing response itself may be a response to an open-ended task, but the feedback provided is based on a pre-established framework of writing mechanics, depth of knowledge, or other similar continuums of knowledge, understandings, skills, or disposition development. The problem with framework analysis is that it only sees what the selected framework is looking for. In some cases, this may be fine, but in the context of research, this approach may assume certain learning outcomes at the expense of being more open-minded to other possible outcomes. In cases where the teacher-researcher is open to all the learning or ideas that may be present in qualitative data, a different method is needed. One such method is called thematic analysis. A range of qualitative data types can be analyzed using thematic analysis. These include open-ended survey responses, observation notes, student blogs, and transcripts from audio or video recordings of interviews, focus groups, or classroom-based lessons. What all these data types have in common is that they represent a large quantity of unstructured data. Thematic analysis is grounded in the words and writing of the participants or respondents, in most cases, your students. The purpose of thematic analysis is to discover the patterns or structure in the data and to analyze the data using that structure. To get started with thematic analysis, you should begin by quickly browsing the text data. This involves reading slowly enough so that you begin to notice patterns, but not so slowly that you can accurately name them. After an initial read-through, you should make notes about your first impressions. It is important to be open to all the ideas that might be represented in the data, but you will inevitably be drawn to the data that reinforces your expectations and the data that challenges your expectations. Next, read through the data more slowly and begin underlining keywords or phrases. These may describe behaviors, events, states, meanings, levels of participation, relationships, conditions, consequences, settings, processes, or whatever the respondents have written or said that is relevant to the research question. You may find that it is useful to use colors as you underline. and to use the same color each time you come across the same or same types of words or phrases. This process is called substantive coding, and the common words or phrases are called ETIC codes. Next, you will need to decide which ETIC codes are most important or relevant to your research question, and which are similar enough that they can be combined without losing the depth of detail you need to answer your research question. You do not need to use all the original codes in this second stage of the coding process. The new coding categories, which may combine 2 or more ETIC codes, will likely be more general or conceptual than the original ETIC codes. This process is called selective coding, and the conceptual groupings are called EMIC codes. Before you read through the responses again and apply the EMIC codes, you should construct a table with the following column headings: EMIC code name, EMIC code description, and EMIC code examples. Again, you may want to assign a different color to each EMIC code and highlight the text as you complete the selective coding. To improve the reliability of your coding, you should consider asking another person to review the selective code table and to use the colors to independently code the data. Comparing your coding results to theirs can provide a measure of inter-observer reliability, the extent to which 2 different people apply the EMIC codes in the same way. Similarly, you could repeat the selective coding again yourself and compare your first coding results to your second coding results to measure the intra-observer reliability, the extent to which you consistently apply your own EMIC codes. While the codes that emerge from substantive and selective coding are the main result of your qualitative data analysis, coded responses can also be quantified by calculating response frequency. This may be used to establish hierarchies among the codes. When you are reporting the results of qualitative data coding, you should use a neutral voice while presenting descriptions of the codes and selected examples from the written responses or transcripts. Evaluations or interpretations of the coded data should be reserved for the discussion. In session 9, our last session, we will present different ways you can report and share your action research findings. Thank you for your interest in action research.
All right, before we go on to Learning Log 8.1, I just wanted to ask if anyone has any questions about qualitative data coding. Again, if you can type an asterisk into the box and we will unmute your microphone. Okay, it doesn't look like we have any questions at this point. So what I'm going to ask you to do is take out your Learning Log 8.1 or open it up on your laptop, however you're accessing that. And even if you haven't completed it, to please do that so that you can follow along in the Learning Log while your colleagues talk about how they approach the task. In just a moment, we are going to ask you to turn on your video camera as well as your microphones. But first, let me just show you the questions that I want you to talk about today. And I do want to point out that all of these questions appear at the bottom of page 1 on Learning Log 8.1. So once we open up your video cameras, if you're not able to see all of these questions in front of you, directly in front of you, please know that they're at the bottom of the first page of Learning Log 8.1 and refer to that page to see the questions. So I want you to talk about whether the people who completed the task generated the same category names. Or if you didn't, I want you to talk about how the categories that you named were different. In cases where you may have named categories with similar names, how much agreement was there about the percent of responses in each category? And also, what were your top 5 categories? If you had at least 5 categories, what were the 5 categories that you used to categorize those responses? For similar categories, how much agreement exists about which particular responses belong to which category? And finally, how did you handle responses that stated more than one factor for entering teaching? And again, in Learning Log 8.1, you were looking at a teacher survey which asked one question of 90 teachers, and that question was, or I'm sorry, 64 teachers. And the question was, what major factors led you into teaching? And it was an open-ended response. In Learning Log 6.1 or 8.1, you can see the 64 responses that were generated. Okay, again, so what we're going to ask you to do now is please turn on your video camera. Please turn on your microphones. And as soon as we see that all of you are set, we are going to turn off our microphone and start the timer. We're going to give you up to 20 minutes, although if you finish early, we will stop and move on to the next part of this afternoon session. So again, turn on your microphone, turn on your webcam. Oh, and Dale is there now, so Dale is also going to be joining your discussion.
Okay.
Why can't we see the webcams? Can they see themselves? Or can they only see the screen?
They see themselves up here.
Okay.
And here they see.
All right, we're just waiting for Sue to turn on her microphone and Helen to turn on her microphone. And it looks like Wendy is ready, Mary's ready, Wendy's ready, Helen's ready.
Just Sue.
So we need, all right. So at this point, you should all have your microphones and video cameras on. If you find that you cannot hear or see one another, if you could type a message in the box so that we know that. If not, if you want to go ahead and get started, we'll let you know when there's about 10 minutes left. But please go ahead and get started. Thank you.
First question. Tricky.
Yeah.
Hi, shall I start?
This is weird.
Oh, turn up.
Sorry, we're in the same room. So I'm going to turn mine off when Helen is speaking. Is that okay with everyone?
Mhm.
Yes, that will work.
Okay. So I came up with, sorry, I can hear.
Okay, go on.
So I came up with 9 categories. And what I decided to do when people gave more than one reason was to take their first reason rather than try and include all the different reasons that they came up with. Is that what other people did?
No, I took each statement and then I broke it down into the component parts. So if they gave 4 reasons, I listed it 4 times.
Yeah,
And the
I was
different
going to do that. I did it with the first comment, and then I did it with the other comments. And I thought it was going to skew the percentage, but I suppose
That is
I
very
thought
true.
it more probably informative doing it that way.
I've just picked up the email today, folks, so I've only seen the list right now. I'm afraid I don't have any categorization on these yet at all.
So shall I read my categories?
Yeah. Go ahead.
So the first one was making a difference. Second was previous experiences. Then love or like children. Then becoming a teacher based on role models. So I put role models. Become a teacher for convenience or just a default choice. Just there's nothing else to do. Love of subject. Likes to work with others. There was one comment that I thought was unrelated to teaching, specifically. Recommended to become a teacher as well was another one, and there was one that had no comment. I did my n equals 63 rather than 64 because I didn't count that comment because there was none.
What did you
Well,
do, Helen, for the one that says love of reading summer off?
Yeah, that's the one that I think what I
Father of
put
a high
as.
school administrator, enjoy being around kids. Did you just choose one?
No, hold on. So what number's
Number
that?
18.
18. I think I put. Where's 5? Convenience or default.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, just sort of nothing specific really. But if you'd done like Wendy and had done those 3 points there, it might have given you a better picture, sort of a more in-depth picture.
Wendy, what categories did you use?
Yeah, so because I'm not an original thinker, I Googled,
You are.
I Googled the statement, what major factors led you into teaching, which brought up a report from the ATL that gave their categories. So I used the categories that they had given. So the first one was enjoy working with children and young people. Want to make a difference, and I included impact in that one as well. Variety, so every day is different. Inspired by my teachers at school. Love of my subject. To have fun. Great experience in my own education. Having longer holidays. Family members work in education. Poor experience in my own education. Avoiding having to use childcare if or starting a family. Limited career options after graduating. And then, so those were the lists that I got from this other survey. And then as I was coding those, I tried to combine the different categories, and then there were some that I didn't feel fitted, so I added coaching as one, a natural gift, work experience or babysitting, so that was more at sort of a high school level, the experience of teaching. The love of the learning process or explaining, social dynamics, and then I actually, the one that had no comment, I had that as a separate one, so okay. I did include that in the percentages. So probably didn't do it the way we were supposed to, but was my starting point. Yeah.
I don't think there is a one way, because we're not really sure.
That's me. No, it's not. Move away. Yeah.
I don't know if there was a one way of doing it, because although we've got the survey responses, we've got the questions that they ask, we actually don't know what it is that they're, unless I missed it, what it is actually that they're looking for. Are they looking to bring more people into teaching, and therefore they're looking to see it, or whether they're trying to look at what would make a good teacher? It's very much a question out from within.
Okay. So what, Wendy, which one did you think come up as the most popular?
The biggest one was enjoy working with children and young people. So I had 47% cited that. But then remember that I've included several reasons as I went through, so that one came up at the top.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that one. Sorry, Wendy, can you repeat the top one?
The top one was enjoy working with children and young people.
Oh, okay.
And then the second one with 31% was want to make a difference or impact. And then the third one was inspired by my teachers at school. That was 16%. And then the love of my subject, which was 14%. And then the fifth one was having longer holidays, which was 13%.
Hmm. Yeah, you're right. We can't really compare our two because we did them differently. But my one came out as top as making a difference. Then second one was role models, so having had good teachers at school. The third one was convenience, so longer holidays or childcare. And then the fourth was previous experiences, such as coaching. And the fifth was the love of children, liking children.
Yeah, so I think with the reason the enjoy working with children came up so high on mine was I combined anyone who said that they enjoyed working with children and also if they loved children. Yeah. So maybe that is a bit...
I did the same thing, and I collapsed a lot of my categories, so my categories weren't exhaustive. I had 5 categories: family influence, love of working with children, teacher inspiration. I put the schedule and benefits together, and I also put aptitude, interest, and enjoyment together. So I think by doing it that way, I've lost a lot of information, but my goal was to make it as concise as possible, but I don't think that was the aim of the exercise. I think if I would have separated out every one of them, I would have had about 11 categories. I don't know if that's appropriate or not. I just would find it hard to work with that many categories.
I come back to why we're doing it.
Susan, I can't hear you. I don't know why.
So if you come, I'll come off and you go on.
Okay. I should be able to. Can you hear me now? No.
A little, yeah, you're quiet, but I can hear it.
Okay. What I was saying was I wasn't the problem I have with this is that I think we were doing it in isolation. If we knew what the end product was going to be, what we were looking for this data to tell us, I think that would be the deciding factor. Was I started to go with you, Dale. I tried to look and group them, so I was ending up with fewer categories to discuss. I suppose I was thinking of writing it up, and how would I have written it up? If you've got 11 categories, you'd end up by just writing an awful lot of. Basically, you're regurgitating every question that they've answered, because you've broken them all down into almost each one. There would only be some that had 2 or 3 in it, and I don't know the right answer either. Maybe Ben can come in, or if he's listening to us, and say, which would have been the right way for this sort of question? Would it have been to have 5 or 6 or 7 categories for 64 questions, or would it have been better to have had 20 categories, but only maybe very, very low percentages for each one?
Yep. Hi, everybody. If it's okay, I'll chime in now. It's been really great to listen to kind of the way that you've thought through this exercise. And one of the first things that I want to say is that while there's no single correct answer to this exercise, one of the important things is to just be certain that you have followed this process for thematic analysis. And let me just make a couple of observations generally about the things that people said. I think it was Helen who gave her explanation first. And Helen, one of the things that I just want to clarify is that, in fact, you can look at a single response and you can assign as many codes to that response as are relevant. And so I think Wendy had mentioned that one of the first things that she did is she looked at the responses and she said, oh, this response looks like more than one thing, so I'm going to divide it up into the different types of responses that are kind of strung together in this person's single response. Multiple coding is absolutely fine. And again, Helen, you observed that one of the problems with that is that if you now were to add up your percentages, they would exceed 100. And just to let you know that is perfectly fine. It's one of those details that I didn't include in the original text because it can be just too much to try to think about all those things at one time. But you can apply multiple codes to each response. And again, what that means is that you end up with more than 100% when you add all the codes up. I thought that Wendy's approach was particularly interesting because, Wendy, what you actually did is a hybrid between framework analysis and thematic analysis. So you first went to a predetermined framework, which is the piece that you found online, and you said, well, let me try to apply this to this particular set of data. And you actually found that most of the data fit that framework. But then you took the pieces that didn't fit, and with those pieces, you then did kind of a thematic analysis. So based on what people actually said, you created some additional coding categories. That's fine, but as long as you recognize that first approach that you took, that framework analysis, is a different approach to coding qualitative data than thematic analysis. And again, it's not to say that it's right or wrong, just that you recognize that that's what you did, so that if this was your piece of research, you could explain that in your methodology. And as long as you explained it, it's a perfectly fine approach, as long as other people understand how you got to where you got to. The kind of the thing that all of you seem to be questioning is there a number of codes which are better than others? So, for example, is it better to have a lot of smaller codes that are much more tightly defined, or is it better to have fewer codes, but codes that tend to be more conceptual? In thematic analysis, there is this first step called substantive coding. And in substantive coding, that's where you're trying to actually see all the different kinds of things that the respondents said. And in substantive coding, you want to have as many codes as possible because you want it to be as descriptive and rich and granular as it can be. And it is completely the decision of the researcher to decide that that level of explanation is really what you need to answer your question. If in fact you don't need that level of explanation, and in fact what you get is so kind of spread across the board, so you see, 8% for this, 7.5% for this, 8% for this, the more kind of, the smaller your categories become, the less able you are to actually recognize a hierarchy in the responses. And as I said, that may actually help you answer your research question better. But if what you're trying to actually do is actually see a hierarchy in those responses, you want to do the second step of thematic analysis, which is selective coding. And selective coding means that you look at all of those codes that came out of the substantive coding exercise, and you say, right, which of these are really pretty closely related and can be pushed together and grouped under the same code or the same heading. What you want to be really certain of then is that if you begin combining codes, you want to give a name to those combined categories, and it may take its name from one of the original codes, or it may be completely different. But you want to say what that code is, and you want to define the code. So you say that this code includes both a love of children and a desire to make a difference, or this code includes both perhaps the convenience of the teaching schedule as well as being able to accommodate a family and a job at the same time. You just want to define whatever those codes are once you begin to combine them. And then you also want to give examples of the range of different things that people have said. And the reason that you would do that is that whatever the codes are that you end up with, the important thing is that you believe that if you yourself were to start with a blank sheet of responses with no information on it and your codes, that every time that you went through that set of responses, that you would code those responses the exact same way. That's where you begin to build the validity into the process. Similarly, in the short video clip, I also talked about this idea of then taking those codes and taking the responses without any notes on them and giving them to another person to see if they, in fact, would apply your codes the same way. Regardless of whether you're doing framework analysis or whether you're doing just the first part of substantive thematic analysis, which is the substantive coding, or where you're combining the substantive codes to create selective codes, what you want to make sure is that whoever, or if you were to do it again, that you use those codes consistently and you get the same result. Yeah, that's the most important part. Does anyone have any questions or comments or other thoughts that come to mind?
So is it helpful to know the end product, though?
Yes, and you will know the end product because you will know who the participants are, and it could be that the participants have an expectation that you're trying to get a certain kind of information. You will know what your research question is, and again, this was an exercise, so you actually saw a data set in isolation of all of those things. You will know what the background literature said about your question in the beginning, and so you may be wanting, the level of detail that you're looking for, you may need to have in order to be able to, in your discussion, say the extent to which your results mirrored or contradicted the research that you read about. All of those things will help you make that decision. I mean, typically it'll be really, really clear what level of understanding you're trying to have.
Then what about researcher bias, though? Because if I would like to know the end result, because that's the type of learner I am. But if I'm trying to say that my class needs more time for collaboration time, I could actually grade or I could code the responses in such a way to prove what it is that I'm wanting it to do.
That's always a risk with every single step in the action research process. So what you would want to do is you would actually want to share that dilemma with a colleague and get feedback from a colleague. And if they, if the other person says, well, I really think that, that you're trying to shoehorn the codes into something that you're trying to prove, if you get that feedback, that's how you actually maintain kind of the validity of the process. It's the only way to do it in action research. If you were to go all the way through without having that feedback to the point where you were presenting at a conference or you were writing a research paper or even just an article based on your research for a publication, what you don't want to do is you don't want to get all the way to that step and have that question. You want to question it at every step along the way. And it's not an easy thing sometimes to step outside your own expectations and look at something in a subjective way. And again, that's where having a critical friend, someone who's going to give you constructive advice, becomes really important to this process. Does that answer your question, Sue? Does anyone else have a question or comment or want to share a dilemma or something that they encountered as they were working through this process?
Yes, Ben, just a comment and a question. I mean, I've tried coding before, and I always find there's something I miss out. Like in the instructions, it says to make sure that the codes are mutually exclusive and exhaustive. Is there a tool that could help you check for that, or is it using another person? Is there a methodical way that you could go through without going it over and over the stems and the responses in order to make sure it's exhaustive and make sure that they don't overlap? And I'm talking about the preliminary coding. You mentioned substantive coding.
Yeah. So there are some pieces of software that can do this work, but they are, as you might imagine, wildly imperfect.
Right.
So you might use them for a second opinion, but you wouldn't simply dump your data into the software and expect to get a perfect result out the other side. Yeah. Probably the most reliable way of verifying that the codes are correct and you haven't missed things is to have another person look at the codes. But one of the things I want to really make certain of is that when you're doing that kind of initial coding, when you're doing the substantive coding process, you may identify codes that reflect a certain kind of response that is absolutely not relevant to your research question. And there are a lot of reasons that may happen. And one of those reasons may be that the question wasn't worded clearly enough. And so you get a mix of things that are actual responses to your question, as well as things which you really, using your judgment, you can assume are things where people have misunderstood the question or they actually have answered a slightly different question because maybe perhaps the question was a little bit ambiguous. But the thing you always have to be open to is that the possibility that you're getting responses that you just had not anticipated before, and so they seem unfamiliar or unrelated at first. And so before you eliminate them, and you can eliminate them at that early stage, just because you have several codes of responses that many people have said, if you find that they're irrelevant to answering the research question, you don't use them as you go forward. You simply note that that they existed, but that you've not included them all the way through the data reporting stage and the discussion stage of the action research process. So it's perfectly acceptable to find that there are codes that don't help you answer your research question. Again, there are whole reasons whole series of reasons why you may get those kinds of responses.
Thank you.
Yeah. Does anyone else have comments or questions?
I just wanted to apologize to everyone for not doing the homework, but the week was very busy and I didn't feel well neither, so I do apologize.
Yeah,
Promise I'll be on top of it next time.
No, Carmen, please don't feel badly about that. But I hope that just by listening to what other people have done, that even though you haven't done it yet, that you have some insight into how this process works, because I think that in action research, that for a lot of people, this is the step of the process that tends to be the most intimidating. I mean, I think even more intimidating than doing the literature review. That's this thing of what do you do with all this qualitative data? Because it's really difficult to think of an action research project where you wouldn't generate some volume of qualitative data. And feeling comfortable in handling it is really important. Again, to go back to Wendy's response, that you may find that in handling this data that you simply want to apply a simple framework from some external source to the data, that you don't want to have this in-depth look at the language that the respondents used or the detail of their responses, that you simply want to apply this framework, see how many responses are relevant to the framework, see how many responses didn't relate to the framework, and that's as far as you need to go. We're working with a project right now which is looking at the outcomes of one of our big educational initiatives in the middle school here at Cobham. And that researcher has developed her own framework in order to go back and look at her data. So she collected all the data and then created kind of a rubric of the range of responses, and then went back and rated the responses based on where they fell within a rubric. And again, that's an example of kind of a combination of first doing thematic analysis and using the thematic analysis to create a framework, but then using the framework to do the actual analysis, kind of the opposite of what Wendy did, which is looking at the framework and then looking at all the responses that didn't fit the framework and doing a thematic analysis of the things that were left over. Again, there's no right or wrong. You just need to be able to explain what you did and why you did it in the research report. And it also needs to kind of stand the test of a colleague giving you, constructive feedback on having taken that approach, and maybe helping you figure out whether or not there were any pitfalls in taking that approach, or whether it was justified and does help you answer your research question. Anything else? Okay, we're going to flip through the next slides, which is our slides that I'd set up entirely for if we would have gone away and done this as small group discussion. But since we did it as a whole group discussion, all that remains at this point of this session is to be certain that you don't have anything else for today, but to remind you that we did provide Learning Log 8.2. If you felt that it was useful to go in and make any notes about what we talked about in this live session to kind of add to the other materials that you have, please do that. Again, you will have noticed that for session 8, and you'll see it again for session 9, that the reading in the Cher Hendricks book is optional. And again, the reason that we're making that optional at this point is that you might spend a lot of time reading that, but you may struggle to find the relevance of that information right now because you're not actually carrying out an action research project. If you find it's useful and you have the time, I certainly encourage you to look at those chapters. If you don't, please do use the course guide, which I promise I will send this time and not forget, and the directions on the learning logs. And that really it will be the most important things for preparing for session 9. Session 9 is our last session, and again, like this one, it will be a little bit shorter than the earlier sessions because what we're talking about now really is kind of conceptual. We don't actually have data or results to be looking at. In session 9, you're going to be looking at one more case study, and you'll be doing a little bit of looking at it in terms of thinking about the entire process, as well as kind of the end of the process that we'll cover next week, which is writing a discussion and the components of an action research report. All right, again, if you have any questions between now and next week, please don't hesitate to contact us. Thank you all for joining us this week, and we will see you next week online for our final session, session 9. Thank you, guys, and have a great week.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. Bye. Bye, everyone.
Yeah.